Istanbul, 1566. An old scholar stands at the edge of an open grave. He holds a small wooden chest, and he is breaking the lock. Inside, there is no gold. There are no diamonds. There are only papers. Reading them, this scholar, the Grand Mufti of the empire, begins to weep. These documents were placed here according to a very specific final will. They were meant to be buried alongside the man who ruled 3 continents for 46 years, a ruler Muslims called the Caliph, and Europe called Suleiman the Magnificent. Suleiman reigned as the ultimate architect of order, but these papers suggest a final struggle between the laws he wrote for his people and the choices he made to stay in power. In September 1520, the Topkapi Palace fell silent. The terrifying Ottoman ruler Yavuz Sultan Selim had died, leaving a vast, secure state to his 26-year-old son. In the capitals of Europe, rivals celebrated. One historian wrote that a furious lion had left a gentle lamb as his successor. Suleiman, it seemed, was a youth who preferred poetry and jewelry to the business of war. Suleiman recognized that this reputation was a threat to the state. He watched Charles V of the Holy Roman Empire dreaming of global dominance, and knew that if he did not establish a sense of awe immediately, his borders would be vulnerable to every king in Europe. Europe expected a scholar. They were about to meet a sovereign who understood that survival on the world stage required a demonstration of absolute force. In 1521, just months after taking the throne, Suleiman marched 100,000 soldiers to Belgrade, the gateway to Europe. In 3 weeks, the fortress fell. The following year, he moved against Rhodes. For 5 months, he bombarded the pirate knights of St. John, crushing a stronghold that had resisted even his great-grandfather. By 1526, he reduced the Hungarian army to dust at the Battle of Mohacs. And with the help of naval genius Harriddin Barbarossa, he extended this dominance to the Mediterranean and the Black Sea. This dominance was codified in the 1533 Treaty of Constantinople. Suleiman forced the Austrian Archduke to acknowledge the Ottoman Grand Vizier as an equal, and he declared that no monarch in Europe could claim the title of emperor. Only Suleiman held that rank. In 6 years, the perceived lamb had become a sovereign who dictated the terms of European kingship with a single letter. Within his own borders, Suleiman was known as Kanuni, the lawgiver. He replaced the chaos of regional tradition with a uniform bureaucracy, a rigid framework of law meant to govern every street and palace in his empire. Yet inside this cold system, Suleiman fell in love with a concubine named Hurrem. He broke centuries of Ottoman tradition by freeing her and making her his legal queen. But Hurrem's position was fragile. Under the law of fratricide, Suleiman's eldest son, Prince Mustafa, took the throne. Hurrem's own children could be legally executed to prevent civil war. For the queen, survival meant finding a way to bend the very system Suleiman had built. The first to fall was the Grand Vizier, Ibrahim Pasha. As Suleiman's closest childhood friend, Ibrahim had reached a level of power no minister had ever seen, eventually declaring himself a sultan of the army during a campaign in Iraq. Knowing Ibrahim supported her rival son, Hurrem highlighted this arrogance to Suleiman. The sultan consulted his legal framework, asking the Grand Mufti for a formal decree to eliminate a man who had become a threat to the throne. On March 14, 1536, Suleiman invited Ibrahim for dinner. They shared old memories, and Ibrahim went to sleep in the palace, believing he was protected by his friend. The next morning, his body was found. He had been strangled. The execution followed the letter of the law, but it left Suleiman at the center of a system where he was now the only one left to trust. The system's focus now shifted to Prince Mustafa. He was a brilliant soldier and deeply popular with the army, qualities that made him a prime candidate for rebellion in the eyes of a paranoid monarchy. Using forged letters and the Sultan's lifelong fear of being dethroned by his heir, the palace inner circle convinced Suleiman that Mustafa was conspiring with the Safavid Empire. Once again, a legal decree was issued. In an army camp at Konya, Mustafa entered his father's tent unarmed, expecting an audience. Instead, he was met by 7 deaf-mute executioners. He fought to save his life, but he was eventually overwhelmed. The state had been secured against a perceived threat, but the sultan who left that tent was a changed man, isolated by the very laws he used to protect his crown. By the late years of his reign, the Ottoman Empire had reached its geographical limits. The failed siege of Vienna and the logistical strain of such a massive territory meant the era of rapid expansion was over. As the borders stopped moving, the empire's energy turned inward. The legal system Suleiman had designed for efficiency became rigid, replacing the innovation of the battlefield with a slow, stifling bureaucracy. The throne passed to Suleiman's son, Selim, who became the first sultan to never lead his army into battle. Authority shifted from the sovereign to the ministers and the politics of the harem. By prioritizing the cold stability of his laws over the potential of his most capable heir, Suleiman had preserved his own reign at the cost of the warrior leadership that had built the empire. The era of the conquering sultan was effectively at an end. In his final years, Suleiman lived in isolation, abandoning his gold utensils to eat from earthen pots. He spent his days in prayer, reportedly weeping over the friends and family he had ordered to be put to death. He died in a tent during a military campaign in Hungary in 1566, at 71 years old. We return to the grave. Inside the chest were those legal decrees, the fatwas authorizing the deaths of Ibrahim and Mustafa. Suleiman wanted these buried with him. He intended to show them to the divine court as proof that his actions followed the laws of the state and the scholars of his time. Standing over the grave, the Grand Mufti saw the tragedy in the request. He realized that while the papers satisfied the laws of men, they offered no shelter from the weight of what had been done. Suleiman left behind the Suleymaniye Mosque and an empire that spanned 3 continents. But his final act suggests that even the most magnificent ruler eventually finds himself at the edge of a grave, hoping that a stack of papers can justify the cost of the throne.